Welcome to The Real News and to the second segment of our interview with Sinclair Thomson. Welcome back, Sinclair.
Thank you.
So, we were talking about the Bolivian new constitution.
Right.
And the key features and segments in it.
Right.
And what transformations it will bring about to the indigenous population. But there are other more interesting features as well. So can you elaborate?
Yes, I think one of the things about this document is it's a compromise document. It's the outcome of a struggle between popular social forces and the government on the one hand, and right-wing opposition forces based in the lowland parts of Bolivia. This document reflects the interests of both sides. And one of the ways in which you can see the compromises here is in the question of land reform. The Bolivian government was calling for a major land reform, and this constitution is disappointing for indigenous peoples, in particular because it does not allow for the redistribution of existing large-scale agricultural estates. The vote on Sunday has set a new limit on the size of agricultural properties.
Compromise with whom?
Well, right-wing forces based in the lowlands were very concerned about any kind of agrarian reform happening as a result of the political process in Bolivia. And they were fighting tooth and nail to prevent the redistribution of existing lands in the country. And in the end, in the final negotiations between the government and the right, which allowed this whole constitution to come up as a referendum, in those negotiations, the government made a major concession, and they said that we will not seize and redistribute large agrarian properties which already exist.
So this was essentially for a more peaceful transition and to be able to implement some form of land reform?
Yeah, I think it was really one of the crucial points of negotiation. The government conceded in order to bring the political opposition into some kind of a consensus that would allow Congress to approve the referendum on this draft of the Constitution.
So this is a compromise because the alternative would be what?
Well, the MAS would not have been able to put through a new Constitution, which had been the popular demands.
And they were facing a great deal of violent uprising on the part of the
right wing had been on the warpath in recent years and had seriously challenged governmental authority in the lowland parts of the country. In earlier part of last year, it seemed like the MAS government had virtually lost control and legitimacy in the lowland parts of the region. So I think it made this concession in order to try to reconstitute its legitimacy and authority in the country as a whole, and to leave some kind of concrete legacy in the form of the Constitution. But this is disappointing. In the future, large landed properties over 12,000 hectares will not be allowed, but they had to give in on the redistribution of existing large-scale properties. And that is something that the landed elite, ranching interests and agricultural interests, agribusiness interests in Santa Cruz were fighting for.
So the compromise was done so that there would be a more peaceful conditions in the country in order to achieve the larger transformative.
Yes, to try to achieve some kind of national unity in the framework of the Constitution.
The term limits on the presidency was also a major issue.
There again,
controversy.
Evo Morales made a concession at the again late in the game in these last-minute negotiations. The MAS was seeking for Evo Morales to be elected 2 successive terms. The opposition opposed that on the grounds that the MAS government was totalitarian and Evo Morales was seeking a kind of lifetime presidency, that was the right-wing propaganda.
In the previous constitution, what were the term limits?
There could be re-election after a term out of office. Okay, someone could be elected twice, but that would only be after a term out of office.
No consecutive
terms. That's right.
I see. And this change would have allowed him to run again?
In this constitution, future presidents in the future will be allowed to run for office consecutively 2 times in a row. But in the case of Evo Morales, the deal that was cut is that he won't be able to run twice in a row after this constitution has been put in place. He'll be able to complete his current term and then run for election 1 more time. So that was again...
So essentially a 2-term limit on the presidency as a
Yes.
result of this constitution being passed.
Yeah, so that's one more case in which the Mus conceded in the interest of reaching some kind of reconciliation politically.
And this particular issue became so controversial because they were comparing it to Venezuela and President Chavez as seeking of endless terms for presidency.
Yes. It's remarkable. The right-wing opposition has waged a war against Morales and this government on the grounds that it's a totalitarian or communist government, constantly trying to link him to Chavez. And there are comparisons to Hitler and to Stalin. All of this is hugely overblown. I mean, here in New York, Bloomberg has just set things up for himself to be reelected in office. In other words, to transform the laws about term limits, right? And yet, the New York Times is in support of ending term limits when it comes to Bloomberg.
And but there are many other countries where there's really no term limits on a presidency. France, for example. It's
still a question of whether the voters want to approve or not in a given politician. So. This government has fought and won repeatedly in the electoral arena, and the opposition has tried to tar it as being anti-democratic. But in fact, and we can see in this referendum itself, there's been an unprecedented amount of popular and national political participation.
Thank you, Sinclair. We're going to continue this discussion in part 3, and let's talk about how this is being received in the region and relations with other Latin American countries.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, and please come back for Sinclair, Thomson, and our continuation of Bolivia discussion. Thank you.
Donate today and receive a new documentary film available to members of the Real News Network. The History of the National Security State with legendary author Gore Vidal. Bonus features of the DVD include an in-depth response to Vidal from ex-CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who served under 7 U.S. presidents, an exclusive interview with Colin Powell's former Chief of Staff Larry Wilkerson, and an insightful interview with oil policy analyst Antonia Juhas.
The news magazine of the screen. Living glimpses of history in the making.
Hollywood and Washington, there's a symbiotic relationship. They both deal with illusions. Reality doesn't often play much of a part. I think I saw through a myth of the Cold War almost from the beginning. I was a Washington political kid from a political family. Roosevelt first had radio because he had this great speaking voice and everyone liked to hear. Truman proceeded to break every arrangement that Roosevelt had set up for a peaceful coexistence. And Truman thought that it would be a good idea. Why not just stay armed all the time? And then he devised the national security state. You've got to go up and swear allegiance to the United States or else you're a commie. I mean, we had imported fascism. We get Dwight Eisenhower, who said that we have this great military industrial complex. It is a dangerous thing. And he said this is going to change everything. And the way our country's governed is going to change us politically. Along comes Jack Kennedy, who wanted to make his mark, believed in the Cold War. But he said, in this kind of politics, it is the appearance of things that matters. I think everybody should take a sober look at the world about us. The national security state still exists. only it isn't communism anymore, it's terrorism. This is the most serious thing that has happened in the history of the United States. Knowledge is power. We need an honest news system.
We need the real news.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Make a tax-deductible donation now of at least $10 a month or a one-time give of at least $75. As a thank you for your support, we will send you the new documentary film, The History of the National Security State.